Chapter 4 is on histology, which is the study of tissues. On our first slide here, we can see the various examples of tissue all throughout the body. So we're going to start from the top here. Remember, there's four different type of tissues, and found in the brain, spinal cord, and nerves, there are all neurons. So nervous tissue. And this nervous tissue is going to contain things like cell bodies, which are called somas, dendrites, which receive the signal, and then also an axon. So it's really the simplest type of tissue that we're going to talk about at the end of the chapter. The next type is muscle tissue, which isn't bad either because there's only three types. The first one is called skeletal muscle, and it's responsible for attaching bone to the skeletal muscle, and it allows for contraction. The second type of muscle is muscle found within the heart called cardiac muscle. And there's going to be some similarities between skeletal and cardiac muscle because they are both what are called striated. And you're going to learn a lot about why they're striated later on in the semester. The third type of muscle is called smooth muscle, and it's going to be in parts of the body like the respiratory system, the digestive system, blood vessels, also in parts of the reproductive system, specifically the female reproductive system. So the lining of the uterus contains smooth muscle. The next one is called epithelial tissue. And there's going to be several types that you need to know for epithelial tissue. Most of them are just going to be one layer thick, but they form boundaries between different environments, and they protect, secrete, absorb, and also filter. So one example of where we would find them is lining a digestive tract organ and hollow organ, and it's the type of tissue that touches the material within that system. So, for example, if it's in the digestive system, the nutrients that are traveling through the digestive system are going to come in contact with that epithelial tissue. Another example of epithelial tissue is found in certain glands like the pancreas, as well as the skin surface, like the epidermis. This is a great example of where it protects your body. And that specific type of epithelium is called keratinized, not non-keratinized. So keratinized essentially means that it has a tough, fibrous protein in it for protection. So it's keratinized, stratified, which means that it has many layers, and it's also, the cells look squashed, so it's squamous, and then, of course, epithelium. There's another type of stratified squamous epithelium, which is non-keratinized, but it's found inside the body. The last type is going to be the most complex, which means there's many subtypes of connective tissue. It's responsible for supporting, protecting, binding other tissues together, and it varies between bones, fat cells, tendons, ligaments. So bones, for example, are referred to as osseous tissue. The tendons, there's also ligaments, which fit into the same category. And these tendons or ligaments are going to be called dense regular connective tissue. And I'm going to put CT to abbreviate connective tissue. Another example is fat and other soft padding tissue. This would be called adipose tissue. And there'll be others that we're going to be learning about it. Even blood, which is one of those exceptions because it has what's called a liquid extracellular matrix. It's going to contain red blood cells and white blood cells. And there's some others that we're going to talk about. So, again, the most complex type of connective tissue is going to be, or the most complex group of tissue is going to be connective tissue. Other examples are things like areolar connective tissue, adipose connective tissue. We talked about adipose. There's reticular connective tissue, which would be in the lymph nodes as well as the spleen. There's different types of dense connective tissue, like the one I mentioned here for tendons and ligaments. There's also another type called dense irregular connective tissue. The dense irregular connective tissue is going to be found in joints. There's also elastic, dense connective tissue. There's three types of cartilages, and then the blood and the bones. So there's quite a few of connective tissue. I don't expect you to remember them at this point because we're going to go through each individual one. Well, we can see the nervous tissue in the brain, the spinal cord, and all the different nerves that go to the extremity. Muscle, we can see skeletal muscle here, cardiac muscle here, and then muscle that's anywhere in the digestive tract is going to be smooth muscle. Epithelial is going to be lining the digestive organs and hollow organs. So, lining the stomach, for example, would be epithelial tissue. Different glands, like the pancreas, would be epithelial tissue, as well as the skin surface, which is the epidermis. And then there's a plethora of types of connective tissue. We're not going to go through all of those right now, but we will have a slide and I'll be explaining more on each different type of connective tissue. On this slide, we have the various functions of the epithelial tissue. And what I want to do is give you some of the examples of specific types of connective tissue responsible for these. So for protection, we have many layers, which makes sense that many layers would protect us. We have stratified squamous. For absorption and secretion, we have cells that are only one layer thick, which is why we use simple. So we have simple cuboidal, which means it's essentially shaped like a cube, as well as simple columnar. And that's the same thing for secretion. So it's almost like secretion is the opposite of absorption. So we have simple cuboidal and simple columnar as well. Filtration is a type of passive membrane transport you learned about in chapter 3, and that occurs in simple squamous epithelium, so only one layer thick, and it occurs in places like the kidneys and the blood capillaries. Excretion would be in the urinary system, and it's called transitional epithelium. And then finally, the sensory reception is going to occur in the skin, and that is called keratinized, stratified squamous. So remember, there's a keratinized, which is outside the body, but there's also examples of non-keratinized, which would be inside the body. Also, other senses have sensory reception, such as the taste bud, the inner ear, which is what's called the cochlea, and an area of the inner ear that's responsible for balance or equilibrium. And you'll be learning about those more at the end of the semester.